Hi everyone, this is Robbie Jung, the worship director at Living Hope, and I also serve as one of the elders here. In the days leading up to Good Friday and the resurrection on Easter Sunday, I'm reminded of how Jesus' life, death, and resurrection brings us home to a God who loves us and is unashamed of us, a God who is willing to bring us into his home and family. Hebrews chapter 2 verse 11 says, "For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source, and that is why he, Jesus, is not ashamed to call them brothers." This brings me great confidence. Academically, I know that all of mankind is doomed from the start because humans are sinners. We don't do any good. But on a personal level, beyond the academics, I know this is especially true because I know my own heart, and I know my every thought, and I know that I'm a failure because I'm not good. And so knowing this, I had no confidence when I approached God or came to church. Before I became a believer, I was filled with shame because I knew that who I was couldn't measure up to the standard of perfection that God is. But as I searched and had conversations with those who called Jesus Lord, it became clear that they all pointed to one truth, and that changed everything. The truth is, Jesus took the most shameful form of death for no wrongdoing of his own. He hung on a cross, he was mocked, he was spat on, he was laughed at, he was put on shameful display for all to see. And yet, that's the work that allows me to have no shame, to come into his home and to call him Lord. I tried to think, what is the opposite of shame? I think the obvious answer is pride. You can be ashamed of something, or you can be proud of it. But in this moment of Jesus' shame, he buys us belonging. Because of this, we belong. And when you belong, you feel no shame. Have you ever had that experience of being an outsider? I remember when I got my first teaching job at an urban high school in Los Angeles. I was the outsider. I looked different than everybody. I was young, I was new. I was filled with ideas, but I had little or no experience. The first few weeks were really hard. It didn't matter if my lesson on Shakespeare went well. It didn't matter that the basketball team that I coached beat the rival school across town. It didn't even matter that I was nice to those around me. I was an outsider and I didn't belong. I would go from group to group during lunch to find my niche. During staff meetings, I would sit in random spots to find my group of people, whoever they would be. And then one day, probably out of desperation, another teacher who was quite popular among the staff invited me to his room after school to talk about basketball. When I got there, we talked about basketball for a couple of minutes before he asked for my help in rearranging some classroom furniture. I was tricked, and I was used as some free labor. But as we both went to work moving the desks and chairs, he started to give me a little history lesson on the staff at the school. The next morning at our faculty meeting, I sat in a random spot as I usually did. In comes that teacher, and he sits next to me. As we begin to chat, others trickle in and into the meeting, and he calls them over and he has them sit down right next to us, and he introduces me to the others, saying, "Hey, you guys, meet my friends, Robbie." And that's when everything changed. I had a home that day during lunch, and every day after that, I felt belonging. And though I was different, I looked different, I was different, I probably didn't belong at the school for a lot of reasons. But that gesture from my friend changed everything. He was unashamed to call me, someone who looked different, friend, and this was my ticket in. Jesus is our unashamed brother. He has given us full access to his house and to his dad, to the Father. We can take confidence in this and no longer be the outsider. There's no shame. You and I both have friends who feel that they don't belong. This Easter season is a perfect opportunity to invite those friends, family members, classmates, co-workers to church and to hear about Jesus, who is not ashamed of us. Invite them so they don't have to feel like outsiders any longer. This could change everything.